find the latter much better in terms of trying to remember what I've read. I oftentimes will read a paragraph, and if I really want to, oh, thank you so much.
You're not getting sound.
Oh, we're not kidding. Thank you so much. And if I really want to understand it, I will put the book down and try to repeat the argument in that paragraph. Because saying it out loud, it's the difference between passive and active learning. So the nice thing about being together is that we will, I think, intensify the possibility of really kind of grappling with it together. It's well worth reading. I think it's a masterpiece. Okay, now welcome to live streamers. So glad to have you with us as well. So today we are looking at Abraham Joshua Heschel. I don't know whether you've had a chance to read the piece and the excerpt from the book. Levinson also, in the last pages, beginning on 223, which he gives the title, A Conclusion, Mending the World / Mending Israel, where he tries to make a distinction between modern and contemporary. You know, the word modern works until it doesn't. As soon as there's a transition to some other ethos or some other synthesis, modern works well. And Levinson tries to make a case, and I think it's a good case, that in recent decades something new has happened in Jewish thinking. So those of you who have the book, I want to highlight things, and of course along the way we'll have our discussion as well. So let's turn to page 209. For those that don't have the book, you know, we'll try to make it clear. Okay, so I'm down about 7 lines, right in the middle of a line. The emphasis here, I think he's talking about his upbringing, especially in the Hasidic environment, was on spiritual intensity and a conviction that God was everywhere available to the one who sought him. At the same time, the young Heschel received a classical Jewish education. So in this biographical introduction, he's pointing out the sources that lead to Heschel's thought. And I think he will say there are 3 of them. Hasidic understanding of Judaism, classical Jewish literature, the Talmuds, the Midrash, the codes, and the Western intellectual tradition, which really already summarizes a bit one of the main ideas of our time together, and that is the notion of Judaism confronting the modern world, whatever is the modern world at the time that the author wrote. Okay, turning to page 210. So down near the bottom of the page, let's look at the top of the page first, top line. The understanding for the realness of the Spirit and for the holy dimension of all existence was not primarily the result of book learning, but the cumulative effect of life lived among people who were sure that everything hinted at something transcendent. So this is the environment in which Heschel grew up, that the presence of God was a daily experience and the sanctification of life a daily task. It's a nice summary of what that Hasidic mentality is all about. Going down to, let's see now, the paragraph beginning at the root of Heschel's concern, and I want to go down somewhere 5, 6 lines, middle of a line. These reflections, see where I am, led Heschel to write his doctoral dissertation on the biblical prophets, in which he sought to understand these ancient giants of the Spirit, these authentic spokesmen of genuine religion in their own terms, to draw out the power of their own essentially non-Western perspective, to comprehend the foundations of a worldview in which a personal God calls prophets to further his purposes on earth. Now that's a potent sentence, isn't it? Let's go back to it. These reflections on his own upbringing and on what he has learned and read, these reflections led Heschel to write his doctoral dissertation on the biblical prophets, in which he sought to understand these ancient giants of the spirit, these authentic spokesmen of genuine religion. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Not religion, as he'll go on to say, as studied at the university, which has its role and its power, but genuine, authentic religion is intrinsic to itself. These authentic spokesmen of genuine religion, in their own terms, to draw out the power of their own essentially non-Western perspective, to comprehend the foundations of a worldview, the prophets as promulgating a worldview in which the personal God, and he means this unapologetically, the personal God calls prophets. Prophets are called. How did Amos get to be a prophet? Well, we might say he was sitting at home one day and he thought, gee, what's my vocation? I think I'll go out and talk to the people and admonish them. No, for Heschel, the prophets were genuinely called. We use the word vocation for this. Vocation comes from the Latin that means to be called. To draw their own essentially non-Western perspective, to comprehend the foundations of a worldview in which a personal God calls prophets to further his purposes on earth. Okay? So the prophets as a vehicle for God's vocation for us. Let's go down to the next paragraph. I'm about 4 lines down, beginning his central aim. Do you see it? His central aim, Heschel's central aim, was to convey the subtlety and the power of traditional texts. I want to pause on that. So sometimes we think that traditional texts are for those days and not for ours, that our ethos, our sensibilities are different, and that these texts are not going to speak to us anymore. The subtlety and power of traditional texts, what he means is the ongoing power of those texts and the authenticity of religious practices, phenomena that were either largely unknown or seriously misunderstood by moderns, academic and not academic alike. So he's trying to get back to something that is indigenous, authentic to this tradition, that seems antithetical to modern secular universities who don't feature this approach to religion. I want to go back up. I want to go back down again. But Heschel, continuing, sought more than description. So, as description, he could be classified as a scholar. I'm going to discuss what is authentic merely descriptively. But the author here is saying, but Heschel sought more than description. He also wanted to awaken his audience, key word for him, alienated from their own spiritual capacities, modern secularism, modern instrumentalism, utilitarianism that is interested in goals, accomplishing certain things. He also wanted to awaken his audience, alienated from their own spiritual capacities, to the joy and meaning that the Jewish tradition can provide. I circled 2 words in this excerpt: awaken and joy. that this understanding of religion can bring us a great deal of joy. I want to go back up into this paragraph beginning while still in his teens, about 6 lines down at the end of a line, beginning, but at the, you see this? But at the same time, Heschel found himself puzzled, even irritated by what seemed to him a characteristic blindness that afflicted his brilliant professors. This is Heschel in his studying for his doctorate in a secular university. To them, quoting him, religion was a feeling, God was an idea, a postulate of reason. They granted God's status of being a logical possibility, but to assume that he had existence would have been a crime against epistemology, by which he means what can we know for sure? And we can't know for sure that there is a God through the use of our reason. And therefore, it would be a crime against a theory of knowledge to assume that we can know it. So at most, we'll make it a postulate. Just like the famous parallel postulate in Euclidean geometry, that parallel lines meet only in infinity. How does anybody know that? We haven't gotten to infinity. For all we know, they may come together again. That's why it's not a certitude, but a postulate, a premise on the basis of which you can develop a mathematical theory. To them, I'm going to go back. Religion was a feeling. We call this the romantic view of religion. God, anybody hear of Friedrich Schleiermacher? Anybody hear of Friedrich Schleiermacher? He's also a great Plato scholar as well as a cleric. God was an idea, a postulate of reason. They granted him the status of being a logical possibility. But to assume that he had existence would have been a crime against epistemology. He, Heschel, chafed as well at the professional claim that, quoting him, everything lay open to rational inquiry. So he wants to make a case for another mode of knowing that isn't the subject of reason. That sovereign reason, okay, let's go back. He chafed as well at the professorial claim that everything lay open to rational inquiry, that sovereign reason could solve all problems and dissolve all mysteries. So you can see what his orientation is. Let's go to page 211. First paragraph, 4 lines down. What modern advocates of religion, authors and preachers alike, have failed to show, Heschel maintained, was that living religion is fundamentally a fabric of responses to life's persisting questions. Now, this is a major claim on his part, that religion is about life, and that religion is a response to the issues that all human beings, whether they are inclined to be religious or not, have to face. So he's making a very large claim about the scope of religion's mandate, that it deals with the fundamental issues of the human condition. Starting that again. What modern advocates of religion, often preachers alike, have failed to show, when we go to the university, we can take courses in sociology and psychology and chemistry and art and religion. One of the areas of discourse. Okay. So, have failed to show, Heschel maintained, was that living religion is fundamentally a fabric of responses to life-persisting questions. What kind of universe do I inhabit? Is it friendly to human striving, or is it indifferent, even hostile? What can I understand, and what are the limits of understanding? What is the purpose of my life? What can I hope to accomplish, and by what activities? Why do I suffer and die? And so Heschel developed, in a way similar to the great Protestant theologian Paul Tillich, a kind of answering theology in which religion provides the responses to the questions that come from life. So you see, at this point, Heschel becomes an important figure in both something particular and something universal. And something universal because Judaism is dealing with the same problems that everybody deals with, and may have something to teach not only Jews but non-Jews, just as we can learn from Christianity, we can learn from Buddhism, learn from Islam, because according to Heschel, they're all facing the same issues and may have insights we don't have. So it's particular to Judaism, but I think this reference to Paul Tillich is a suggestion that Heschel is at work in not only dealing with Jewish questions, but with human questions. He did offer a course at the Union Theological Seminary, which was right down the street from the Jewish Theological Seminary and Columbia. So Heschel has a broader impact on the basis of this. In other words, continuing, authentic religion and its contributions to a life purposely lived is not just for those who are already religious. So here Heschel is trying to broaden the power and the scope of religion, that in some sense everybody can benefit from thinking about these things, which doesn't mean that you haven't really done your job until you become authentically and personally a believer, but that religion is trying to deal with these questions. We could even call this an existentialist view of religion. Religion is dealing with the particulars of my existence. Let's continue on. So same page, down near the bottom. Let's look at that quote in smaller type, beginning, "It is customary," see it? "It is customary to blame secular science and anti-religious philosophy for the eclipse of religion in the modern society," right? We go to the university and we study the ologies, sociology, psychology, anthropology, the logic of what does it mean to be human? The logic of society. And so there comes to be a kind of bias against another religious point of view, and therefore we might blame the general culture for the weakening of religion in the modern world. Let me start again. "It is customary to blame science and anti-religious philosophy for the eclipse of religion in modern society. It would be more honest to blame religion for its own defeats. Religion declined not because it was refuted, but because it became irrelevant, dull, oppressive, insipid. When faith is completely replaced by creed, I believe X, I believe Y, worship by discipline, love by habit, when the crisis of today is ignored because of the splendor of the past, when faith becomes an heirloom rather than a living foundation, when religion speaks only in the name of authority rather than with the voice of compassion, its message becomes meaningless. Religion is an answer to man's ultimate questions. The moment we become oblivious to ultimate questions, religion becomes irrelevant and its crisis sets in." In what role do you think Heschel is playing in this paragraph? A prophet. A prophet criticizes and constructs. And Heschel here, speaking as Amos did, as one of the people, not as an outsider, but as an insider, criticizing but not leaving it as tearing down, so to speak, but wanting to construct again. So Heschel, among his other roles, is the role of a prophet, calling us to things that we may not have been aware of or onto. Let's continue. According to Heschel, religion's decisive conviction is that a holy dimension exists within and behind the world of appearances. Namely, science and its scientific methods can't do everything. Science can accomplish a lot, but can't talk about the holy dimension that exists. It's not that scientists can't do it. It's that science can't do it. Science is a discipline, right? I mean, I've said this sort of thing before. If a chemist goes into the laboratory one morning and comes out and says, a miracle happened in my laboratory today, and I got this answer, he is read out of the profession. But it's perfectly valid for that scientist to go home and prepare for church the next day as a believer. So, according to Heschel, religion's decisive conviction is that a holy dimension exists within and behind the world of appearances. Its chief task is to make that this dimension palpable and accessible, right? In the medieval period, in the shtetl, you wouldn't have to make it palpable. People were living it. Now, because of the impact of secularism, our antennae are not attuned to these realities. So somebody has to make it palpable again. And its central challenge is to make plain the various ways of God. There are three starting points of contemplation about God, three trails that lead to him. The first is the way of sensing the presence of God in the world, in things. The second is the way of sensing his presence in the Bible, in a text. And the third is the way of sensing his presence in sacred deeds. I think this is profound, actually. If you're kind of curious about the nature of things, you might go out and not only study the laws of how nature works, but feel the awe in the natural world. Feel the sublime, for example. If you're a reader, you might find it in a text in the Bible. If your interest is primarily in social action, in good deeds, you can find God in those activities as well. What he doesn't mention, but of course he probably would, is the synagogue. I think he would think that it exists also in the worship service at its best, but his interest is in the things beyond some of the conventional activities. These three ways, back to this text at the bottom, correspond in our tradition to the main aspects of religious existence: worship, learning, and action. The three are one, and we must go all three ways to reach the destination. For this is what Israel, read Judaism, this is Levinson, discovered. The God of nature is the God of history, and the way to know him is to do his will. So we can already see Heschel as involved in repairing the world, marching in Selma, objecting to the war in Vietnam, are already foreshadowed here in terms of one of the ways of relating to God, knowing God's existence, is through the power of deeds, which, after all, emerge from a recognition and a critique of some of the problems in society and the ways in which our deeds can both be a religious gesture and help to repair the world. You know Heschel's famous quote, I'm not sure, it may be here actually as well, that when I marched, I felt that my feet were praying, right? That's a pretty arresting comment, isn't it? Okay, well, I've been doing all the reading here and talking. Gary?
Can I go back to the beginning of this paragraph?
Yep.
Page 211. It states there the three starting points of contemplation about God, the trails that lead to Him. The first is the way of sensing the presence of God. To me, that means that you have to have an open mind, and you have to be willing to accept the idea of a God that you can't see, feel, or touch,
Yeah.
or hear. So you have to have that, you have to go into it without that kind of an approach.
Right.
Otherwise, I'm not sure that you could sense the presence of God.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good point. That's it. But one of his psychological ideas that we have to experience the world through the eyes of receptivity, not that we know. And he makes a distinction between scientific curiosity and a different kind of curiosity. So scientific curiosity's goal is to solve the problem and to end curiosity on that problem. Whereas for him, religious, spiritual curiosity is never ended. It's a stance in the world. And so we never can fully arrive at a full understanding of it, right? It's openness to reality. It's a stance. And I think he's trying to make a case for it. Jordan?
Two things, Roger. One, scientific curiosity doesn't stop when you have a solution. It just tells you to go the next step.
Right.
I have trouble with his very last statement in
Yep.
the paragraph.
Yep.
Harry. To know him and to do his will.
Yeah.
We've been inundated with people who know God's will.
Yes.
And we hear that all the time. So how do you know? How are we supposed to know God's will?
Yeah. That's a very powerful question. Let me stammer some partial responses. I think community has something to do with it. You remember my famous example, famous to me at least, at Torah study some years ago, where we studied the book of Joshua, and I made a proposal about there being a counter-narrative that run through the book of Joshua, and we spent several months doing it, and at the end, we took a vote. How many believe that there is a counter-narrative in this book? There was only one person in the room who believed it still, and that was me. So that, look, I mean, what was I to make of that? I still believed it, but my belief was to some degree shaken and diminished because the will of the people is the will of God in a certain way. So communities help us to balance the peculiarities of our positions.
There are so many communities, and we can go back to the southern communities who thought that racism was appropriate,
Right,
and the rest of us didn't.
right.
So that's one of the ologies that you mentioned, sociology, communitarianism in philosophy. Those are the ologies. And to depend upon the community to tell me God's will
Yeah.
is dangerous.
Right. No, I think you're making a very, very good point. I mean, Heschel is not a philosopher who is trying to argue his position. He's really a person who is trying to open our eyes to a way of viewing the world. Yeah, I think Heschel would also say, though, that the great traditions of history, this is not a QED, but the great traditions of the world have, over the centuries and millennia, developed some sense about how to flourish in the world. And that prima facie, these great traditions can be looked to for guidance. What do you think about that?
Patriarchy,
Well, look, I mean, the
great tradition.
great traditions are also self-correcting, if they are.
Correction.
Yeah. And the process of self-correction is never over. No, that's true. But I think there are guidelines, if not irrefutable convictions.
Sounds like a counter-narrative.
Yeah, yes.
You said you agree with Levison, there's something non-Western
About Judaism? Yeah, well, in a way, it's a paradox, because when we think of the Western tradition, we think of at least partly the Judeo-Christian tradition. Leo Strauss talks about the two sources of Western tradition, what he calls the underlying energy, and that is the ongoing conflict between reason and revelation. So in that sense, the religious tradition is Western, one of the foundations. But, I think that what he has in mind is much more the intellectual, scientific, that things are studied to be known at the university, and this notion of awe, of surprise, of joy is more marginal, at least to modern Western thinking. I think that's what he has in mind. It's something of a paradox, as I've just said, because it is one of the foundations. What is more Western than Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, Protestantism, and so on? Yeah. But I think he's making a case here. I think he's thinking of the Western tradition in more narrow terms, the rationalist tradition, whereas there is also the tradition of revelation. So, that was another stammer. Yeah, Steve?
On that point, Judaism may have made significant contributions to the West, but that doesn't necessarily change Judaism on its own. So it can be distinct from the West, even though it made major contributions to the idea of the West.
But one of the things I think we've learned throughout these sessions together is the impact of the West, especially the Enlightenment, the Emancipation, and the streams of culture in 19th century Europe. So I think there's an intersection there. Judaism can barricade itself off, either literally or figuratively, from the streams of Western tradition, but I think one of the things we've learned here is that it hasn't. Is that a response to what you've said?
I was trying to say there isn't a contradiction
Between
saying that Judaism exists and it isn't the Western tradition, even though it contributed to the Western tradition.
Yeah. It isn't the Western tradition, I think, is a tough claim because it's been impacted. I mean, is Maimonides a part of the Western tradition? Yes. Is Maimonides a central part of the Jewish tradition? Yes. So his Judaism is a kind of synthesis between reason and revelation. He says in the Guide for the Perplexed that if Aristotle had a proof for the eternality of the world, that it was not created in time the way the Bible says, he would have to agree with it. If Aristotle had a proof, he would have to agree with it. Fortunately, he says Aristotle didn't have a proof. So I can continue to believe in the creation of the world. So where is Maimonides in this?
One Jewish thinker.
Well, Solomon Maimon and Hermann Cohen, their whole tradition is Spinoza in some sense is a Jewish thinker. He has room for God in his philosophy. He's a liberal in some way, in some important ways. So I don't know. It strikes me that there is a kind of interaction between what about Christianity? Augustine brings Platonism into Christianity as Aquinas brings Aristotle in. And is that authentic or not? I mean, we borrow from the riches of those traditions outside of ourselves.
The way Heschel structures Judaism, the way he views Judaism,
Yes.
seems to be distinct from Western thought.
Okay. Is that the idea you were?
Yeah.
That I think is a powerful point. Is he trying to reshape Judaism for a modern age, which has become a bit tone deaf to some of the animating sources of the Jewish tradition?
Yes, and I think we're inheritors quite substantially from that.
Of Heschel.
Of Heschel.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good point. One of my favorite examples, I probably used it here, is the change in the nature of the Kabbalat Shabbat service from the 90s when I was here to now. In the 90s, it was extremely hierarchical, that all the energy came from the pulpit. The congregants were really auditors of it. The Torah was brought out, put on the lectern, read by the clergy, put back. The singer sang to us. We didn't sing. Famously to me, Heschel's daughter, Susanna Heschel, said to me, excuse me, once after a Yom Kippur morning service, you know what? The only people who sing in this service are the Gentile choir people. Now, of course, it's just totally different. The congregation is as involved as the clergy. If we bring the Torah out, we parade it around. Singing happens throughout, and we're not just sung at. So I think that's Heschel's impact on the reawakening of the joy of participation, and not just a more antiseptic, look, I mean, I love that service that I did in the 90s. It's a different service. Yeah. Other thought? Yeah, Clark.
How do you or how does modernism interpret the prophets? We know that Heschel wrote this great book about the prophets, and he posits a topology which I found pretty compelling. And one day I was having a discussion with a rabbi, and he said, you know how we would talk about the prophets today? And I said, no, how would we? He said, they were all schizophrenic. And yet the prophets are such part of our tradition, and they animate so much of what we do in today's world. And yet he kind of reduced it to a psychological.
In that book,
I'm sorry.
in his book on the prophets.
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, no, that's right. And your question is?
I'm curious of how people look at the prophets in the light of psychology and psychiatry in today's world.
Well, look, I mean, you can see the prophets as schizophrenic if you want to. They certainly have laid foundations for Western morality. I think Heschel would say that the prophets are several things. They believed in the reality of the voice of God. They believed that God had a desire for us to respond, and especially to respond by caring for the weak and the oppressed. The prophets were, in a certain sense, martyrs in the original sense of martyr, which comes from the Greek word that means to witness. The prophets witnessed their faith. Amos, on one fine Rosh Hashanah morning, went from tending his sycamore trees to a service in Bethel, and he proclaimed that God is angry, all by himself, until the priest, Amaziah, said, "Get out of here." So he endangered himself. Jeremiah at one point cries out to God, "Call somebody else. I've got a fire in my belly and I can't help but proclaim God's word." but it gets me into deep peril and trouble. So the prophets were not only sitting in their studies and proclaiming an ethical perspective, they were out there witnessing to the power of God. I mean, that's what witnesses do, don't they? They really, through their lives, try to make real the invisible to our empirical senses, the reality of that in life. How do I know that there is a God, I might say? Well, Amos gave up his life nearly in order to proclaim it. Now, that doesn't mean there is a God, but it's certainly a very dramatic testimony of the power of that belief in God, as if that reality actually happens. So, you're asking about moderns? Yeah. Well, it just depends on who the moderns are. I mean, if you have a secular orientation and believe only what your senses give rise to and the power of thought to put it together, then it's like saying, let's suppose that a punt, which is a move in football, is a reality. Let's call it a reality. But I'm only playing the game of baseball. If I'm playing the game of baseball only, a punt doesn't exist. I have to be willing to broaden my purview and to say, the game that I'm playing is only part of reality, and I'm going to allow the possibility that there's such a thing as a punt, although not in the game I play. That's where the analogy breaks down a bit. So, I mean, it's easy from a secular perspective to say that's just not a viable move in my worldview, which I think Heschel is arguing against. Let's broaden our worldview. Arthur?
So I've been very excited about this chapter. I love Joshua Heschel, the prophet books, Man's Search for Meaning,
Yep.
God's Not Alone.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when Diane and I got married 50 years ago, we gave each other one copy of this and signed it to each other, Man's Search for Meaning.
Okay, very good.
So, I don't feel the same way about Soloveitchik. I'm intrigued by him.
Yes.
I'm a little put off by Schneerson's Hasidic approach. But Abraham Joshua Heschel, I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not trying to say this for everybody. But he really moved. There's a flavor in his approach. And I think part of the mystery of him is that he can trace himself back to the great dynasties of Hasidism. See, there's lineages in his family that go back to the Baal Shem Tov. So it's in some ways compelling and intriguing and mysterious that out of that mixture, someone would end up in university, A, and B, bother to speak to the alienated. Now, he's got such a rich tradition that he comes from. He could stay in that tradition. Schneerson, I feel like, went outside the bonds of Hasidism to bring people in. I feel like Heschel said, the world is an astounding place. My tradition has made me aware of things beyond my imagination. And I'd like you to be awe-inspired as well. I don't feel like he wants me to necessarily get a lulav and shake it. He wants me to be amazed. And it really, there's something very, very special about him. And I don't know, I don't find that most other thinkers, either they veer off a little too intellectual or veer off a little too charismatic. Somehow he's able to hold both in the palm of his hand. He has all these rich streams in his being, the deep Hasidism, the deep intellectualism. And when it comes to prophecy, I go to any Reformed congregation and the power of the prophet booms out in any social action committee.
Sure.
And the other thing I want to say about prophecy is the Jewish tradition said it ended after, is it Malachi? So if anyone shows up after Malachi and says, I'm a prophet, by Jewish tradition, he's not.
Well, that was special pleading on the part of the rabbis who wanted to turn the revelation spigot off.
Yes. But, I don't think that I don't think there's many psychiatrists who bother really to weigh whether the prophets were mad or not. because it's such a different realm.
It may be that psychiatrists in their guild environment wouldn't, but outside their offices as people, I mean, a profession means you're going to play by the rules of your profession. It doesn't mean that those rules are all that you are.
Sure.
You know, I mean, baseball analogy.
Yeah.
When you're in uniform playing the game, you're playing the game. But after the game, you put on your street clothes and go and have a different kind of a life. By the way, Arthur, I think one of the things you're saying, let me try to summarize what you're saying, that Heschel is a poet of religion.
For sure.
He's trying to get to the non-rational, to the emotional. I recall a definition of poetry by the poet Louise Glick. She said, there is a soul in me, and it asks to be given its body. The poem is the body, which contains the question, the power that the soul is looking for. And I think that fits Heschel nicely. There's a soul to Judaism. Can we bring it out through embodiment in words and letters? So I think Heschel as a poet of religion, and you know, I mean, poets can't answer all questions, especially when you question them with rational thoughts. But I think there is power here. Clark?
Roger, you just made a quick comment about the rabbis who turned the revelation spigot off. Can you just elaborate on that? When did it happen, and who were they, and what was it all about?
Well, I don't think it happened all at once. You know, the problem with opening, I use the metaphor of the faucet. The problem with opening up, the advantage of opening up the spigot is you get a lot of water pouring out. And let's think of Revelation as that. The water comes from its own source. I don't create it. And it's a potent source, especially if I need it. Once you've opened the spigot, you laid subject to more revelations. Here comes, in the early rabbinic period, Christianity. So is Christianity just the latest example of revelation? And this is dangerous. Islam, other groups of Jews who have a very different, the rabbinic tradition was often objected to by other traditions, the Karaite tradition. The Karaites, the word Karaite comes from the word kara, which means scripture. The Karaites were a one revelation group of Jews, Bible only. Whereas the rabbis are a two revelation system, the written Torah and the oral Torah. Look, all we have is the written Torah. Obviously, if you're going to keep a piece of writing alive down through the generations, you're going to have to enable interpretation. But how do I know that the interpretation of X rabbi is something that has the divine authority behind it or is worthy of adherence? So the rabbis are really taking a dare here in order to keep Judaism alive. But if the spigot is open, then all kinds of new revelations can vie for presence, both Jewish and non-Jewish. So did they know that there's no more revelation? Of course not. This was a prudential move on their part to be able to keep these things at bay.
Roger, how do we manage conflicting revelations?
How much time do I have?
I'm troubled now. I realize that I might have a revelation, and you might have one that's 180 degrees to the contrary.
Right.
And both of us think we have the truth revealed to us.
No, it's very, very true. You know, in traditional Judaism, there is a hierarchy of who speaks for the tradition. I've used this example before, maybe in this group. Many decades ago, actually, I was out in Colorado to do a wedding, and the groom was a Reformed Jew, and the bride came from an Orthodox stream, and so I was co-officiating with an Orthodox rabbi. And during the rehearsal, a question arose, as I recall, something like, can the divorced parents together walk the bride down the aisle? Well, Rabbi, what do you think? So, I thought about it, and I thought, sure, that's fine. The Orthodox rabbi said, and this is, I think, a fascinating answer, let's pause the rehearsal so I can find a phone and call my rabbi. And he called his rabbi, and the rabbi said, I don't know. Let me call my rabbi. And at third hand, that rabbi evidently said, yes. But one way of solving the problem with different revelations, this is one of the implications of an open spigot. All kinds of thoughts can claim for themselves revelation. So Judaism has developed a hierarchy, traditional Judaism, where only certain authorities can really, paskin shayla, so to speak, decide questions. And the authority is fundamentally demonstrated conversancy, expertise in the tradition, so that really you're bringing, or you hope to be bringing, the authentic voice from the tradition. Now, we all know that there's all these disputes between Hillel and Shammai, and the answer to what's the answer to Hillel says A and Shammai says B? The answer the rabbis came up with is both are the words of the living God, but the decision rests with Hillel. We have to make two kinds of decision. We have to know whether or not to stop on red. So it has to be decided. But, and I think this is not only speculative, this is the case, even the position that lost the argument is kept around because we don't know in the future when this minority view is going to be necessary.
The point is well taken, because I have agreed to stay at the table even when what I consider to be a revelation is trumped, I shouldn't say that, but overtaken by someone of higher authority. I stay at the table.
You stay, I'm not following.
I stay at
The Jewish table?
yes, at the Jewish table. I have said, well, if that's the way it's going to be.
Okay, I
I'm
see
gonna
what you're
take
saying.
off.
You have a
Football
view.
and I are going to go away.
Okay, yeah. And that I think is also not only the power of hierarchy, but the power of the community norm. One of the dictums of medieval Judaism is you cannot promote a law that the people won't follow. So in some ultimate sense, and I don't know at what point, if the people say no, no matter who promulgates the law, so there is this control of the larger corporate body, but not in any algorithmic way. It's not a matter of a decision procedure. You have these different points of authority, so to speak. The rabbi, and the community that try in each new case to figure out how exactly we're going to do this. And sometimes it'll lead to schism.
Right.
Groups will break away.
Well, we've seen
So
that.
bring this into the contemporary world. How does this relate to the role of the Reform movement or HUC, for example,
Yeah.
in establishing what the correct interpretation is?
Well, look, Heschel has had a great impact on all the movements. I've just described how our service is. Our service in 1995, nobody in his or her right mind could have called this neo-Hasidic, right? This was 19th century rationalist Reform Judaism. You had the people in the know doing with what they know, and the people not in the know saying, you want me to stand for the Shema? I'll stand for the Shema. It's a bit of a parody. But now, with all of the singing, let's call it joy, with all of the participation of the people, involvement of the people, this, I think, it's fair to call this neo-Hasidic. And Heschel, I think, is one of the main propellants of this modernity.
But you have, like, with Catholicism, the Pope is the ultimate authority. And is there any ultimate authority within the various Jewish movements, or is it up to each congregation? What is the...
Well, look, I mean, Reform Judaism is congregational. Each congregation, you know, when we went about recently to hire a senior rabbi, they consulted with New York about what are the procedures and so on. But this congregation made the decision. I have a very good friend who's a Catholic priest who is bound, he's retired, but he's bound to the church, and even in retirement, the bishop can say to him, I want you to go do X, I want you to go to do Y. So his parish is not independent the way this congregation is. And I think that for all of the movements, that is true with diminishing applicability. I think the more traditional, the more some central voice becomes important. I mean, for example, the conservative movement has its Committee on Law and Standards. And so they take up questions. Can a woman become a rabbi? And that was something that was debated in the conservative movement throughout the 1980s. And it turns out that one major scholar, who was this? Lieberman, what's his first name? Lieberman, who taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary, was unalterably opposed to it. And so though the movement was moving in that direction, they decided they could not buck him. And until he died, they didn't do it. He happened to die on a plane on the way to Israel. And thereafter, the movement moved to ordain women. So, you know, the Committee on Law and Standards makes a decision. We don't have anything like that. We do have authorities on Jewish law who write books as suggestions. You know, Solomon Freehoff, for example, who was the main guy in Reform Judaism, and his successor in Pittsburgh became his successor also in this domain. So that the structure of the different movements is quite different. The example I gave about this wedding was there was no Committee on Law and Standards in the movement, the Orthodox movement. It was a matter of hierarchy. And until you got to the guy for whose opinion everybody respects, you didn't really have a decision. Now, it doesn't always have to go to that extreme, but the different structures.
Where is the Orthodox top of the heap?
I'm sorry?
You said it's hierarchy for Orthodoxy, so who and where?
So yeah, no, it depends. And here my knowledge is limited. But, for example, a generation ago, Moshe Feinstein was the main halachic authority. Joseph Soloveitchik was also a halachic authority, and he and Feinstein disagreed, and sometimes with acrimony. So I think it's true, but I want to emphasize the word think, that there is even a kind of pluralism in the Orthodox world, depending upon what shtetl, what group you find yourself a part of, your line of authority flows from that. I don't think it's like a pyramid. Well, finally it comes to just one peak at the end. But I'm not 100% certain about it. Yeah, Lou.
I think the deal is it goes up until someone says, I think I know what the answer is in terms of Orthodox. You know, the rabbi, the first rabbi said, oh, I think I know what the answer is. He doesn't call his teacher. You know, so
It just depends. It just
I think that's why you have
depends.
like, different, you have like kashrut, you have different kashrut agencies, with, there's a rabbi in town who says, I think, an Orthodox rabbi in town says, I think I know what the answer is.
Yeah.
That's it,
That assumes a kind of a uniformity. Let's suppose that that Gary and Russell are two rabbis who make decisions. Well, let's have a question. We go to Gary, and Gary makes a decision. Yeah, but Russell has his Talmidim here, his students. And even though X number of us are going to go with Gary, and by the way, Russell, Gary's right.
But you prevail.
So, that's where your picture breaks down, I think, because there is a pluralism even in the Orthodox world, where there are different lines of authority. So in this group, this rabbi, but in another group, another rabbi.
I would say for reform though, when they decide to make, to revise the siddur, I think that was that's sort of like a normative type of thing.
Say that again now, when what?
When they revise the siddur,
Okay, mm-hmm.
that's that's not the standard. Like
That's why we have 5 services in the
It's
Siddur.
some kind of, they have 5 services, but whatever, it's like, it's something that, by means of convenience.
Well, look, I mean, there are different influences. So, who's ordained from our seminary now? There's a kind of mood, and the ordinees who come out of the seminary. I mean, I think of Rabbi Molbaum and Rabbi Dadun and Cantor Lappin, all came out of the seminary essentially at the same time. I came out at a much, much earlier time. For me to make a transition from the prayer book I was used to the next one was something of a leap. For them, they were raised in this kind of mood, so that, yeah, I mean, it's not as if we all just agree automatically on the new prayer book. When Mishkan Tefillah, or even Gates of Prayer, I think as Steve points out, I think it had 9 Kabbalat Shabbat services. What did that mean? One of my professors said what it means is bookbinder to the rescue. I mean, if you want it to be one book, this is the movement's prayer book. There is so much variety that unless you find the right bookbinder, you're not going to be able to make the claim that this is the book. It's like saying the encyclopedia is the book of our culture. But the encyclopedia contains all kinds of different things. So even if we have a prayer book that becomes quasi-standard, some congregations, I think Suburban Temple was using the Union Prayer Book long after it fell out of favor in most congregations. So, these things, like any evolution, take time to catch on, and if they don't have something internally compelling, they don't catch on. They have to capture the mood of the time. Yeah, Wendy?
When questions come up, do Reform rabbis consult responsa? And is there anything, there's nothing binding about responsa?
Absolutely not.
And does the conservative movement have anything similar to that?
I'm sure they have the Law and Committee and the Committee on Law and Standards, which puts out its, and I think that for a question of an answer to be binding, there needs to be unanimity. If there's a minority view, then I think their discretion enters the picture. To what degree, I don't know. If you ask me, I have a variety of responsive books, And if there's a question that I'm asked that I don't know the answer to, or I'm not confident in my answer, I will go to these books and just get a sense of, as we do for anything, what is the broader view of this question? What sorts of things have I not thought of, which gives me a broader view? Let's suppose I read 3 or 4 things on a particular topic. What do I do now? I make my own decision. I hope I'm informed by what others who have thought more about it than I have contributed. But look, I mean, the congregation might rise up in anger and so on, or some people. But that's the way I would do it. I wouldn't do it just off the top of my head unless I really felt through experience I really have come to a settled view. Howard?
Did Heschel in any significant way disagree with Orthodox beliefs, or did he just have a different emphasis?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that he talks about this somewhere. Let's look on page 218 for those who have the books. This may not, so the last paragraph. He's talking about, so the second paragraph, third paragraph, starting, what are the 4 dimensions of religious existence? See it? So they are ritual, what else? So he talks about in the last paragraph, there's creed, there are principles, there's faith, inwardness, there's law, there's context. And I think that his view is, and so he goes on, let's go on from there. Do you see where I am? Third line from the bottom. There are situations in which, so he's talked about 4 aspects. There are situations in which the dimension of depth is missing. The word is proclaimed, the deed is done, but the soul is silent. So here I think he's first mapping out some of the components of a religious worldview, deeds, ideas, rituals. But he's saying that what is fundamental here is the soul activated? And if it isn't, doing the ritual becomes inert. It's not really fulfilling the requirements of religion. So I think that he's critical as well of habituated activity, of following the rules, and so on. There are situations in which the dimension of depth is missing. The word is proclaimed, the deed is done, but the soul is silent. There are also situations in which nothing is happening to the sense, but the whole soul is aflame. Some consider the objective performance to be so sacred and effective that the inner component is of little account. So, please rise for the Shema. I've done it. Please be seated. I've done it. What has gone on inside of me at that moment? Have I just followed the rules, a kind of what you might call an outwardness, which is not insignificant, right? Even if I'm not taking the Shema seriously, I'm rising with my congregation. I'm part of a community. That gesture reminds me of my parents and my siblings and my children. A lot of good things happen by just following, even in a rote way. But Heschel is opposed to this sort of thing. I think he thinks that, and he says it in the next paragraph, we do not have a word for the understanding of these moments, for the events that make up the secret history of religion, or for the records in which these instants are captured. Theology is the doctrine of God, but these moments are neither doctrine nor exclusively divine. They are human as well as divine. I mean, implicit in what I've just read is a subtle critique that if we don't get the moments to have life, that somehow there's something missing. They are, and we should see, I'm going to repeat, they are human as well as divine. The Psalms are not records of theology. The Psalms are the birth pangs of theology. If I read the Psalms for their semantic content, what's the psalmist saying? Then I'm not seeing the Psalms as giving birth through me to some feeling, some emotion, some conviction. And I think Heschel would say, I get the rote stuff. This is important, but it's not what the religion is about. So I think there's a critique of certain forms of religion. You know, Heschel was one of those individuals who was brought over, rescued from the Nazi period. And he originally went to Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. And he hated it there. It was not really his form of Judaism. If you asked him, what do you think about Reform Judaism? I think he would have said, look, it's not for me, and it's really not the way I practice Judaism, or further, I would like Judaism to be practiced. But we're all inhabitants of the same boat. We're all trying to do our best. So I'm not sure Heschel would say, you aren't Jews. But I think he would be critical of some of the ways in which Reform Judaism has unfolded. Look, we're a rationalist-oriented religion. Not in the last generation or so, when Neo-Hasidism has entered Jewish life. Yeah.
So that makes him, as Arthur said, that makes him a poet, but it doesn't make him someone who has really wrestled with the dilemmas and the challenge of modernity that Reformed Jews wrestle with.
You know, I think that he's trying to educate our sensibilities. And I think he is saying, if you try, and maybe it's a process, let's call it spring training, just to continue the metaphor. Look, I mean, you come to spring training and, you know, you're first of all just tossing the ball back and forth. You're not playing double plays right away. So get in the habit of trying to bring this sense of awe, this sense of curiosity, this desire for joy into your worldview. And because this is going to make it more precious for you. So that's what I think that he has a program as well as a theory or a theology. Yeah. When he says Psalms are the birth pangs of theology, he's really talking to us, isn't he? That the Psalms have a potential for awakening us, for bringing life, new vitality to us. And not just read as, what period in history may this psalm have been read? Is this a composite psalm, maybe of two hands? What kind of psalm? You know, there was a very famous scholar on psalms, Hermann Gunkel, early in the 20th century, who wrote a book on what he called in German the Gattungen, the genres of psalms. There are psalms of praise, there are psalms of thanksgiving, petition, meditation, and so on. So he did wondrous work in the analysis of psalms as a literary phenomenon. And this is not nothing. When I go to read or to talk about a psalm, I'm interested in taking a look at Gunkel. What does he think is going on here? And that helps me to get at least my orientation. So, why did I say this? Birth pangs, right. Thank you. You have rebirthed my thought. Right, I think for him, look, he was also a scholar. So I don't think he would cast a crossed eye at scholarship. I think he would say that Gunkel has made a contribution, but not to living religion, not to the way in which religion can inform our worldview and get us to live a life with more vitality, more hopefulness, and so on. Okay, Steve.
I kind of want to respond to Heschel wasn't addressing the concerns of modernity. I think he has, in the sense that if we look at modernity as the rational and having no real answer for why humans exist, what's the purpose of life, and not to be so bold as to speak for Heschel, but I think in my understanding, he's saying the solution to modernity is to understand that there is a realm that you can access that is not in the rational realm. It is God that is accessed through feelings and somewhat mediated through your senses, but ultimately it's non-rational, it's feeling, and he's trying to point out how you can try to get access to that dimension, and in that way address the problems of modernity, to say modernity, yes, is rational, but if you're looking for something about where's my place in the world, you can't access that through the rational. You have to access that through trying to access that dimension and, as he's saying, align your life with God's will. And you can have a whole discussion about what God's will is under those circumstances, but you can't know what God's will is until you take that leap beyond the rational.
So that's a very existentialist journey, which I think is a very Western perspective. And that's why I love him so much, because I think he fits right in with what our generation and our current generation is struggling with all the time.
Yep.
It's a very existentialist view.
So it is Western.
I think so.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Well, he also uses the language of the West. Like he talks about a dimension, which is it's from physics, like a dimension. He speaks to us in Western language because that's how he thinks he's going to be able to communicate what he's trying to say.
Fundamentally not Western.
What's that?
Fundamentally, it's translated into the language that we speak, but
Yes.
it's not Western.
Why is it not Western?
No, I'm just
Well-
saying that what you're saying.
Yeah.
In essence, if you boil down the Western idea, man is the measure of all things, rationality, and anything that is perceived by our senses is real, and anything that is not perceived by our senses is not real.
That's the empiricist bias.
Yes.
No, I think you've summarized it very, very nicely. And Clark, I really like your point that this is also Western. And it just reminds me of the idea that in the history of culture, there's always a pendulum. You know, in the Middle Ages, early in the Middle Ages, philosophical rationalism was predominant. And then you have thinkers in all the traditions who begin to promote a kind of anti-philosophical view, right? Judah Halevi, for example. Think about the reaction to the Enlightenment in the 1810s, 1820s with Romanticism, thinking that the Enlightenment emphasized reason, structure, much too heavily, and that we need to go back to the poetry and to sensibility and to emotion. So in a certain way, I think there's a way to reconcile your points of That's very, I think you've got it for Heschel, and you're right too, but I think in a way this is an oscillation. I think Heschel felt that the impact of rationalism, the Enlightenment, was too strong, and especially the impact of science, which has created in our culture what we might call scientism, which means that science has given us the canons, the methods by which to understand our lives. And therefore, there's going to be a reaction to it because there's also the emotional life. So I think maybe Heschel can be seen as Western, but at a particular moment in the development of Western civilization, where this rebalancing, at least he says, needs to take place.
One approach need not exclude the other.
Say that again?
One approach, rationalism, need not exclude the other, the non-rational approach. It's possible for an individual to have both aspects in his or her personality.
Yeah.
We often think of the brain as being one-sided intellectual, the other side emotional.
Yeah.
And there's some reality to that. But I think that what you're talking about, and Steve has been talking about, is balancing them, bringing them in. They may not be equal in an individual's life, but they can both be opposite.
Right. It's hard to reach that balance, though.
But scientists can also be religious people.
Oh, yes, for sure.
That's obvious.
Sure.
Also religious people.
But in the domain in which one is a scientist, who you are as a person, your preferences have no role. Yeah.
Go back to the first paragraph that you read.
What page?
On page 211. Because we've been talking about the relationship between religion and rationalism, sort of Eastern, Western.
Yes.
But, he's saying that he wants to pin the blame to the decline of religion on religion itself as practice.
Yes.
Okay. What is he talking about in relation to Judaism?
It's boring.
Yeah, okay. It's boring. It's become rote.
In a denominational sense.
Oh, in a
All denominations of Judaism are false here. It's all a husk of routine and it's lost its connection to a sense of the marvelous, of revelation. Is he talking about Jewish establishments of various kinds at that moment?
I think, and I don't know, that what he would say is there's kind of a continuum that can't really be broken down into denominations. Some modes of Jewish expression are just a bit more formalist, more perfunctory. They've gotten to be less emotional. Across the denominations, perhaps in some sense or another, and that what we need to do is bring them back. So I think he would say that I offer this critique about Western religion, Western Judaism, but I can agree, I'm speaking for him now, speculatively, that there are differences across that continuum in that regard, but that we've become more scientific-minded with the great achievements of science. A kind of scientism, as opposed to science, enters our culture. It becomes much more functionalist. Think of the whole STEM, science. What is it? Science, technology, environment, and math. Which is in the decline of it. There's a piece in the New York Times today about that. So I think he would say the pendulum has swung more or less to that part of the continuum, and we need to try to pull it back. Russell?
So when Solzhenitsyn talked about the loneliness of a man of faith,
Yeah.
did he talk about if you're not doing it right, you're lonely because it's just rote, or once you get there and you're doing it right, it's lonely, and does Solzhenitsyn have a point of joy?
I think he certainly has a point of modifying or eliminating loneliness. So by participating in a service, even a rote service, you are you have left your loneliness for
Yes, but
community.
Does he get just to zero, or does
He-
he ever get to joy that Heschel is talking about?
Zero means he's in a community. You want to know if there are more, is there more Heschel
Yes,
stuff?
does he get out of loneliness to that neutrality?
Gee, I don't remember what he says about it. Notice he also says, well, we just read a very small part of it. He talks about two kinds of loneliness. Social loneliness, which is a function of our era, but also existential loneliness. I mean, when God says to Adam in the Garden of Eden, it's not good for man to be alone, this can be taken as a generalization about what it means to be human. I mean, after all, I'm going to get sick and die, and these produce anxieties and a sense of aloneness in me. So, and I think that Soloveitchik's view is that all of this Judaism brings us out at least of the first kind of loneliness, but not the second so much, but I just don't recall. Yeah. You did send me that whole article, didn't you? Did you send it to, or you gave me the,
I sent it.
yeah, and I have the, I have it as well. Well,
One more?
Arthur and then Wendy.
Just Russell.
Oh, you were pointing to him. Be careful how you, I was just scratching my head.
I'll yield to Wendy.
Arthur yields to you, who yields back.
Yes, okay, I'll take it. So Russell makes me think, one of the things I love about Heschel is there's all sorts of religious enthusiasts. And, and you can think about ecstasy, getting all hyped up, whip up the masses to leave your state and to enter some religious frenzy. But that wasn't Heschel. Heschel said the psalmist were the birth pangs of theology towards purpose. So he thought the enthusiasm came from connecting to deep purpose.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, that's, I think, very different from Soloveitchik, because he's looking for purpose across the world, not just within Judaism, Heschel.
Oh, well, that's true. That's true.
And so he will, he would, if he was alive today, I would imagine I think he always asked, where is the greatest suffering?
Mm-hmm. This is
Does the
Heschel.
religious community have the oomph to orient itself to take on the greatest sources of suffering?
This is Heschel.
Heschel.
Yeah.
And I really admire that about him because, you can get religious enthusiasm in all sorts of different flavors. But I like that flavor. I like that flavor of using religion towards purpose.
Yeah, but I think that Soloveitchik, as also a religious existentialist, is interested in that too. I mean, after all, if you quote the Bible, you're quoting the source of multiple religions. If you're quoting halakha, now you're talking Jewish sources. If you're quoting Genesis, which is pre-Jewish,
Yeah.
so I think that his focus on the Genesis stories says that he's also up to something universal
Okay.
as well. Yeah.
But Heschel, for sure.
Okay, well, yeah.
Clearly didn't hear the beginning. You want to tell them about the book that you're talking about?
Yes. So let me say two things. I wasn't going to say this at the beginning. I happen to be the one who wrote the Heschel chapter. You see that?
He kept saying, this is what Levinson said, and I'm thinking, wait a second.
I was trying to avoid responsibility, which is one of my specialties. Yeah. So, a couple of things. So for those who came in after I said this, we're going to continue our bi-weekly, I'm not sure whether it'll be 2 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now, with another book, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's Not in God's Name, with the subtitle Confronting Religious Violence. Really a wonderful book. So there will be some announcements in various publications of the temple, and I'm not going to start it until some of those announcements get out. And, I'll keep you all informed about it. Those of you who are interested may want to buy the book. I think it's also in paperback, and a book very, very well worth reading. Anyway, I've so much enjoyed these.
One question.
Yeah.
Would it be worthwhile to have one more meeting and talk about his conclusion and then conclusions that we found out from all these different perspectives?
So,
Almost got away from me.
being deeply Western and non-hierarchical, let's take a little vote on this. So Russell's suggestion, I think it's a good one. My thought, without making it a full suggestion, is, we're sort of done. Russell's suggesting is we're not really done. We can still do two things. We can look at his conclusion, and we can also give ourselves just an opportunity to the degree that we want to, go back over some of the 13 we've read and ask ourselves what we have learned, what the questions are, and so on. So either one works for me. How many would like to do what Russell is suggesting? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4,
With a
5.
caveat, 5 minutes on the last Heschel writing on depth theology,
Okay.
and then to the conclusion, and then the tie-up.
Okay, so we have two options on the table. We have option one is we're done. Option 2 now is broken down into 2 parts. We're going to go back and look at the Heschel, the depth theology, and we're going to deal with Russell's question about an overview of it.
I second.
Now, there's another, I'm sorry? A third suggestion is we have 2 more, so not 2 more sessions, one on, so now we have 16 options here.
I'm just going to get a cot.
Can I be excused to call my rabbi? Okay, so I think there's a consensus that we ought to do this. So in 2 weeks for sure, while we're getting the word out about the SACs, and we won't start it, it's June 1st, we'll meet again. We're going to look at, as Clark suggests, that depth theology piece, which I think is quite wonderful. And we'll take a look at what Russell suggested is 2 things. Look at the conclusion and then ask ourselves, how have we felt about the book as a whole, and maybe what has even stood out for us? Is there a particular thinker that has especially touched you? And one possible answer is, although it's an evasion, all of them. Okay, very good. Wonderful session again. Heschel doesn't get a lot of applause these days.
Why not?
And why not? Yeah.
Well done on the chapter. Good job.
Oh, good. No, but I think the discussion was very rich, because I think we asked ourselves some meta questions.
We're also much closer to Heschel than probably any of the other thinkers in terms of our thinking about Judaism.
Sensibility.
Yeah.
Now, it's a good question. Maybe we ought to ask, once we face that, maybe we ought to ask a second question. Putting Heschel aside, who else? Who would you say is the one who really touches?
Changes week to week.
Does it? Yeah, I kind of like Geiger. He was very revolutionary in a way, bringing history into the discussion.
I like Salanter because
You like Salanter? Why?
it's religion as self-improvement. And that has a great appeal. Like, it provides a framing for the mitzvot.
Yeah, I like it. As Heschel does in a very different way. This is God's demand on us. Salanter is sort of bottom up.
Salanter, how do you live a good life? Well, you have certain habits that you should exercise.
Yeah, I should have raised that as a question. Could we each of us think about what thinker has made the most impact?
Email the group for next time and say,
Maybe I will, but not Sunday night at 11:30.
There's two ways you could ask that. One is, in the study, which one had the greatest impact, whatever that means. The other is, over the course of your life, have any of these thinkers touched you along the way more than others? Two different.
Right.
But I just want to say thank you for this chapter. I didn't realize you wrote that. It's in the acknowledgments.
It is.
I searched it when you said that. So I'm sorry I missed that, but it's a brilliant chapter. Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, Heschel's amazing. And
Yeah, Heschel is, I think so too. He really touches something deep in us, doesn't he?
And he's singular. His ancestors didn't do any of this. And I don't want to mean this in a mean way, but his descendants haven't either. I mean, he sort of stands out in time.
Well, Susanna, I think, is in a way bringing some of his message. I mean, she's a traditional scholar.
Yeah. She's not like him.
Well, who is?
That's what I'm saying. He's singular.
He's the Isaac Newton.
He's the Isaac Newton, that's true.
It's like,
Right.
So thank you.
Well, I think it's been very
It'll be interesting to read your words. You know, you read other chapters you're reading and think, that's interesting. You're actually reading your words.
And I'm going to write to Levinson, and I'm going to say to him, we made it through your entire book. I think he's going to be very touched and pleased.
I hear that. Is Hillary still alive? I know his wife's very ill.
His wife is very ill?
Very ill.
Alan Levinson?
Hillary, yeah.
She has been ill. You're saying very ill?
I heard that she was getting critical.
where are they living?
He's
See, a friend of Diane's who knows them.
well, he's at the University of Oklahoma. Norman, Oklahoma, right. He's been there for years, chairman of the department for a while.
We went to, what was it called, that Jesus movie? Passion of the Christ. Remember Mel Gibson came out? And he and I wanted to see it. So we went to Shaker Square Cinema and paid for another movie so we would get our money. But we didn't screw the cinema because we paid our ticket and we went to see the movie. And I'll never forget, there were all these Jews in the movie walking around ancient Jerusalem wearing tlasim and hook noses. And Alan and I were like, what the hell? And then we came out, we talked to our Christian friends. They said, there were Jews in the movie? They didn't even see it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Roger, don't take this the wrong way, but are you gonna be home tonight?
Not until later.
Not until later?
Yes.
You wanna just knock on our door, what, between 9 and 10?
I would say even earlier.
Just knock.
What time is too late? 10?
After 10.
Okay. I'll knock on your door.
Yeah, because I have this for you.
That's what you've
I
said.
think you'll enjoy it.
Oh, good. I appreciate that.
And if not, you can hand it right back.
Well, that I would never do.
I didn't gift wrap it.
You didn't get right. Well, then forget it.
It's one of those race ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself.
Oh.
For you.
Oh, the thing speaks for
I hope
itself.
you'll love it. Is that yours, Roger? Don't leave yet. Oh, no. Is that your phone or what is that on the table?
That's a mic.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Hey, that was so much fun the other night.
Yeah.
We will do it again.
I got it in the doghouse with Sharon though. She said, you and Roger monopolized the conversation. I said, you and Jenny were going at it pretty well. It was so easy for us to get involved. And, Roger's so mesmerizing. I blame it all on you. And you and Jenny were doing great. She said, but I like four-way conversations. So I have to be better next time.
Well, by the way, that happens to me a lot. Jackie, who is no shrinking violet, will often say, especially if somebody comes over to a table, and now it's just the two of you guys,
And Sharon and Jackie want their due.
we have to be sensitive.
I know, and that's my Achilles heel. The next day we were out with another couple, I was so much better.
Okay, very good. Yeah, it's my Achilles heel.
Well, I'm gonna blame it on you.
You can blame it. I've got big shoulders until I don't.
I think so.
But, tell Sharon